As blockbuster trades continue to go down across the NHL, the Leafs have still yet to make a move, but more and more reports and rumors are surfacing, highlighting a potential trade between the Toronto Maple Leafs and the Columbus Blue Jackets. We'll break all that down in this episode of Leafs Digest. Before we do, quick reminder, hit the subscribe button. We notice about 78% of you who are watching are not subscribed, so if you aren't already, scroll down, hit that button. We're less than 200 subscribers away from 6,000. Now, Darius, a lot of stuff has been happening. Obviously, the Monahan trade happened today to the Winnipeg Jets, helping shape the market even more. And obviously all the other trades that have gone down. The Leafs now are getting linked to a few different players. So let's just get right into it. Let's not waste any more time. From what a Leaf site, the Hockey Writers kind of initially got it. Talks between Treliving and the Blue Jackets are heating up, and multiple names are to be considered. And this is from the same source as last year, days for the trade with St. Louis for ROR. Now, Darius, we'll get into some of the potential targets for this, for the Toronto Maple Leafs and Brad Treliving. But what are your thoughts on this notion in general? The Leafs could make a trade for the Blue Jackets, as well as, I guess, kind of how the market's shaping up as the Monahan trade just went down. We had the other bigger trade a couple days ago. The market's starting to shape, and a first for Monahan, it's gonna get stuff is getting pricey fast.
Yeah, and we just had two really big trades across the NHL. So like we, talked about yesterday, Treliving's gonna get on the phone, whether it be a defenseman or something else. And I think this is pretty interesting. It started circulating on Twitter around the time the draft was going on last night, about the Leafs kind of being linked to Columbus. And I think it's interesting. Like you said, we're going to get to a couple of guys that they could bring over. But I think Columbus could be a great trade partner because they're not doing great. Obviously, if you look at the standings, right? But the organization as a whole, it doesn't seem like a lot of their players are necessarily happy. Merzlikins, the goaltender, just asked for a trade, and they're not even going to grant him that. Or it's not that they won't grant him that. Other teams are just not interested at this time, even though he is a pretty good goaltender, like he would be on a good team. But even David Juracek, their highly touted right-handed shot defenseman that they just drafted last year, being sent down to the AHL, and he's kind of like, hey, what the heck's going on here? Why am I being sent down? So there's a couple of guys that are not exactly happy with their situation, so it could work out in the Leafs' favor since they've been linked.
Yeah, and obviously the Lindholm trade, and then we have the Monahan trade. First round picks are it's two trades for first round picks happening. That doesn't bode well for the Leafs if you're looking at a Chris Tanev or something like that. But let's get into a couple of the players that you could be looking at here now. A couple of them are realistic. A couple of them aren't as realistic. And let's start with the big one here, which is Boone Jenner, who was not a defenseman, but he is a center. And Darius, this would be a very expensive player to get, of course, but what are your thoughts on a potential Boone Jenner trade to the Toronto Maple Leafs? And again, whether the Leafs are going to, I don't think Brad Treliving's going to necessarily panic and go to overpay just because, the Jets and all these guys are not necessarily correlated. Some are saying the Jets overpaid for Monahan because the Flames traded Lindholm to the Canucks. But what are your thoughts on Boone Jenner? I have his stats up here now. He's very, very, very solid, but he would cost a pretty penny if you are the Toronto Maple Leafs.
I would think in a trade by himself, he would cost quite a bit, which is why I think there might be more than meets the eye with this kind of trade talks or rumblings, whatever you want to call it. But Boone Jenner would be a great ad. I think he would take over kind of where Max Domi's playing right now, probably 3C spot. He is built for the playoffs too. He's the center of the Columbus Blue Jackets. I mean, a couple years ago, they had that great moment where they swept the Tampa Bay Lightning. He is a good player. And if you look at point totals, it's not there, right? He's not a goal scorer. He's not going to get you a bunch of assists. He's not going to get you a point a game a year. But when it comes to the playoffs, he's the type of guy I think you can win with. Obviously, he hasn't done that. He's been in Columbus his entire career. But in terms of adding these types of guys that we're talking about that can contribute in the playoffs and be playoff insurance in case there's injuries, I think he's a guy you should definitely look at if the price is right, considering where Columbus is going. Obviously, they want to get younger. This is not a guy who's going to get any younger. He's already in his 30s. So I think it's something you could at least take a look at if the price is right. If it's like first round picks, because, we've been seeing some crazy trades the last couple of days, maybe back off from it. But I think the Leafs shouldn't be too shy to upgrade in spots that we know they need to upgrade in. That's defense, and that's third and fourth line.
Yeah, and seeing all these other moves go down, the Leafs are definitely and probably do feel pressured to do this. Now, whether it's a guy like Boone Jenner is yet to be seen. I don't know if Brad Treliving is going to shoot that far and go that far for a player. I will quickly ask you this before we move on to a couple of other targets here. What do you think it would take to get Boone Jenner? Because I know a lot of Jackets fans are saying on Twitter that they don't even know if the Leafs have enough assets for them to even consider it. You'd have to suspect it would be maybe, Easton Cowan, Fraser Minton, maybe both of them are part of a bigger deal. What kind of package would you suspect that he would have to pay, Brad Treliving, that is, for Boone Jenner?
I think you're on the right track. I think it's a first round pick or a high end prospect like Easton Cowan or Fraser Mitten. And I only say that because I don't think that's what Boone Jenner is worth. I think that's what the Leafs have to offer. They don't have a second round pick for the next 3 years. So if you could offer a second round pick for Boone Jenner, then you would want to do that, but they don't have those assets.
Yeah, and that second round pick thing, a lot of Leafs fans are upset at Dubas for that, but I'll leave that for another day. Let's move on now to Andrew Peeke. Now, this might be a bit more realistic. Probably is more realistic. 25 years old, defenseman, right-handed shot defenseman. 6 points, 20 games. This is a guy I think we spoke about a while ago, about a month ago now, and we can touch on Chris Tanev a little bit after too. But regarding Andrew Peeke, you can discuss his cost as well, but do you think he would be a good fit? Obviously, it would be a good fit. The Leafs need to upgrade their blue line, whether or not they want to spend the extra capital. But I think this one makes some sense for both sides, especially given what you said about the Blue Jackets, not only on the ice, but kind of off the ice as well from an organizational standpoint. They are in a little bit of a shambles. So what are your thoughts on Andrew Peeke?
Yeah, we talked about him a few months ago as like a potential trade target. He was mixed in with Zadorov at the time and Tanev and all those guys. And my feelings haven't changed on him. I think he'd be a great add. Again, right shot defenseman. He's only played 20 games so far this year, but he's looked pretty good considering what Columbus has done, right? Like you can't put too much stock into Columbus and their players. I feel like a lot of their players would do better on different teams. But I think again, it's the type of guy I think you could add and he would help you in the playoffs, right? And he's not too old either. And we were talking about that in previous videos in the last few days. Don't spend all these assets for UFAs who are up at the end of the year. You want to get guys with maybe a little bit more term or who are a little bit younger as well, because that determines, if they stay or, if you're giving up too much for guys who aren't going to be around.
Yeah, and we've seen Brad Treliving reports have continued to come out about his willingness to, he wants a trade for a guy who has term or at the very least will resign. And we kind of discussed Chris Tanev. There's multiple reports, probably covered in video tomorrow. I just want to get your quick thoughts on Chris Tanev before we do wrap up, considering we're kind of circling all these guys. Again, Tanev's asking price, whether it's a first, whether it's a second, there's various things here now, but we saw Sean Monahan net a first. Would not be surprised if a guy like Chris Tanev nets a first. Again, the trade market this point of the season is not the best. The demand is there, but the supply isn't really there, so the cost obviously is getting augmented a lot, specifically if you just saw, Sean Monahan got a first. A lot of people didn't think he'd be able to get one. We know the Leafs aren't going to trade, or maybe will trade a first for Chris Tanev, but like you mentioned, they don't have any second-round picks, so for them to acquire Chris Tanev, they were going to have, and they would have to give up a first-round pick, and I don't know if that's worth it. I don't have any quick final thoughts before we wrap up.
I think you nailed it there. I think that's where we're at. I think it came out yesterday on Twitter that the asking price was not actually a first-round pick. Like for the rest of the league, it is, somewhere in the neighborhood of a second, maybe something else. But the Leafs don't have that, right? So they don't have that to give up to get Chris Tanev. What are they going to have to give up? It's a first round pick or maybe a prospect, right? I'm more on the side of trading draft picks because you kind of already know what you have with your prospects. I think you would rather hang on to your prospects rather than hang on to a pick. But that being said, for Chris Tanev, I don't know if a first round pick is the way to go. So it's going to be pretty interesting to see where this goes heading into the trade deadline. Because, Chris Tanev would be a great fit, but not for that price. But if he, remains a Flame until the trade deadline and Vancouver, who are in talks, are no longer interested, if Ottawa, who are in talks, which makes no sense to go to Ottawa, are no longer interested, could he fall to the Leafs for something less? I think that's a scenario we should keep an eye on because at his current asking price from the Flames, I don't know if it gets done in Toronto, but we'll see as we head closer to the trade deadline.
Yeah, and that'll wrap it up. Let us know what your thoughts are on this. Let us know which of these targets we discussed of the three are you most interested in. And hopefully Brad Treliving gets on the phone because other teams are paying up and getting better much quicker than maybe Brad Treliving anticipated ahead of this deadline. But thank you guys for watching. We'll see you tomorrow.